and welcome to this session of LitFestX. We're joined by Ms. Anjum Hasan, who's a novelist and journalist, writer. She's written 5 novels. Almost all of them have been bestsellers. They've been nominated for several prestigious awards, including the Man Asian Literary Prize, the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, the Hindu Best Fiction Award, and several others. Anjum is currently the books editor at the Caravan, which is a leading magazine in India. Welcome to LitFestX, Anjum.
Thank you, Kumar. This is a really interesting way of talking about oneself. Self-indulgent to be sitting at
Great.
one's desk and doing it.
Well,
Yeah,
I think the self-indulgence is not on your side; it's on my side. I'm indulging myself, talking to all these literary
I
greats.
hope. So. Yeah. I hope you think it worth your while.
Absolutely. So, Anjum, getting on to today's topic, which is about writing modern India in fiction, and you've written some fairly contemporary stories and about
Hmm.
India in your novels. And tell me,
Hmm.
according to you, what is it that defines modern India? What is changing?
Um, that's a very big question, which I think I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to answer through the books that I hope to continue writing. But yeah, it is something that I've tried to ask, not at all, I think, in a academic or even journalistic way, but very much in a personal, subjective way, through the experiences and through the dilemmas and through the search, various kinds of searches that my characters undergo. And I think the one big thing that has changed is um, the relationship of the middle class to what it considers its Indianness. I mean, we've always been a fairly westernized middle class, but I think because I mean this affects all of the world. It doesn't affect India, but I'm India only. But I'm very interested in the forms that it takes here. The greater confidence combined with, I think, in the middle class, what you see is a certain return to conservatism combined with this sort of modernity. And many of my characters are asking themselves, do they fit within this kind of combination? Um, and it could be younger people, it could be older people, it could be single people, it could be married people. But all these people are questioning, I think, certain paradigms. You know, they're questioning family, they're questioning conventional education, they're questioning conventional career choices or matrimonial choices. So these are not radically rebellious characters. I'm not interested necessarily in um, very unconventional figures. I'm interested in ordinary people, but those that are a little at an angle, let us say, to the middle class dream, and they're asking, how do I make my way with a certain sort of I wouldn't call it nostalgia, but at least a memory of an older way of being, which was maybe not so driven by the need for money or driven by the need for prosperity or driven by the need for aspiration. So that broadly is sort of what has defined the fiction that I've been writing.
You mentioned something
Sorry.
very interesting, that these are ordinary people. They're not really sort of rebels as such, but clearly
Yeah,
they are thinking differently, right? So are you
yeah,
seeing
yeah.
that more as a phenomena which is urban or rural, or what are the shades to that sort of thinking?
It is urban. I can't presume to speak at all about the rural because I have no experience of it. And when and if I do write about it, it's from the point of view of a character who is urban and looking at the rural. But then even when I say rural, it tends to be more, and this is a space that I'm very interested in, the small town. The small town that sometimes feels that it's like left in comparison to the bigger place in India, or is trying. So, for instance, my first novel, Lunatic in My Head, was set in Shillong, a sort of a pre-globalization Shillong, if you can call it that, where there was no internet yet and there was no feeling of connection with the rest of the country. And then when you come to my second novel, Neti Neti, there's a character who grew up there and moves to Bangalore. And when she goes back to Shillong, she finds that actually, in many ways, it's trying to become the place that she has left behind, which is Bangalore. So it's not rural necessarily, but definitely I'm interested in the dynamic between small places and big places and people who come from small places. A lot of us who live in big cities actually are not native to them. They come from small places. So that relationship, that journey is part of this larger journey of trying to fit into middle class India, at least of my fiction, because that journey is also to my idea of success, making it. If I move to Bangalore, move to Bombay, I'm going with an idea of achieving something. And what if that dream has cracks in it? What if that dream is not as glitzy as it seems?
So, you mentioned about cracks in the dream, and so are you referring to sort of the emerging dark side of modern life, especially in in urban India?
There are dark things that happen sometimes in my fiction. There is the sort of everyday violence and the everyday darkness, which interests me very much. It's the sort of thing that you imbibe with your morning coffee. You read the newspapers. You step out on the streets. You see a certain casual violence that is part of the texture of the city, whether it's a traffic accident or it's a murder or it's relationships breaking down or it's just disappointment which takes various extreme forms. So yes, I am interested in that darker side, but not as entertainment, in the sense that therefore I do not feel the need to write a noirish thriller about it or a murder mystery, because I feel it's something that is so much uh, ordinary. It has become so ordinary. How do you relate it then to the conscience of a character like you or me, right? That we live with this sort of thing surrounding us. Does it affect us in a subliminal way? I'm more interested in that question. It may not happen to me that I am in the middle of something that dramatic as a character, but it's coming to me all the time. So subliminally, what's going on in my mind? Is it possible to feel the same sense of security or confidence or belief in the dream to go back to this is the texture of life around us?
You know, rural to urban migration is a real part of the India story. I mean, whether it's for jobs or entrepreneurship, or just
Yeah,
families migrating
yeah,
to a better quality of life, and that has
yeah,
been a theme in your a previous novel, Neti Neti. So tell us a little about
yeah.
that.
Well, like I said, it's not rural in the sense of the village, the Indian
Sure.
village. It's not something that I haven't written about, and I don't know if I could write about it internally. I could write about it as an outsider. But yes, the small town, like I said, fascinates me very much as a sort of in between, neither the village and therefore does not have either the sense of desperation that we can attach to the picture of the village as a kind of completely um, forgotten place without a future, So, or the romantic sort of associations of the village that we sometimes have, the bucolic place, the place where the real India resides, the place, the sort of the character that we've lost in our journey to the city. So not the village contrasting with the city so much as the small town. That fascinates me very much because it's an in-between kind of setting. And so very much, yes, in Neti, there's Shillong, not a small town. I mean, there are many towns in India that would qualify for that moniker much more accurately. Shillong is a city, it's a fairly large city, even in Indian terms, but it is small relative to the metros. In my latest novel, The Cosmopolitans, again, I have my character making this journey to a place that I've partly fictionalized, partly based on places that I've visited, which is again very much characteristic of this sort of small town milieu that I want to explore. And it was once a kingdom. And all over India, you will meet these completely decrepit figures who were once associated with royalty or were royalty themselves. And we hear of the famous ones. We hear of the ones in Rajasthan, or we hear certain the well-known ones in Gujarat or Kashmir, but we don't know that, we don't necessarily realize that there were hundreds upon hundreds of little kingdoms in India at the point when it became a modern country. So what has happened to all these little uh, I mean, they're called kingdoms, but they're really kingdoms. So I'm imagining one such kingdom in the heart of India, and my character goes back and tries to engage with this figure of the king, who again is not a king literally, but he calls himself a king. So yeah, so I'm very interested in the remnants of the small town, and the sort of psychology of the small town, but also what I said a little earlier in the conversation, which is that do we feel that we will find something in the smaller place that we have lost in the big city, something more genuine?
Right, right. Talking about finding stuff that has been lost. Let's shift gears a bit to a wider area. Uh, Clearly, the subgenres within Indian fiction have exploded in the last few years. With a
Yeah,
plethora
yeah,
of writers writing their
true,
own variety and style of Indian fiction.
sure.
And so that, do you think it's time to revisit what is literary fiction, what is literary in the Indian sense? I mean, and let me expand that a little more. Clearly, what started out in India as a movement, whether it were festivals or bookstores or events,
Right, right,
was to promote literature and make it accessible, promote reading,
right.
promote literary behavior, if you will. And suddenly,
Yeah.
there's a feeling that anything literary is also elitist, right? And
Uh-huh.
so,
Uh-huh.
do you think it's time to understand what is this literary and literary fiction, at least in India?
Um, I don't agree that literary is elitist at all. I think that's a very um, casual and easy sort of acquisition to make against the literary. But having said that, I don't think the gatekeepers of the literary have done enough to unpack that idea. I mean, we tend to project it as something valuable, something to be safeguarded, something that is very different from what the crass stuff that passes for popular literature. But other than that, what have we done to give meaning to that term? And here I'm talking about not just writing the books, but talking about the books, writing about the books, creating a sort of language that is accessible, and sort of can give meaning to this whole concept of literary. But I think from the other side of the picture, there is a sort of dubious attachment to the entertainment, by which I mean that we feel threatened by anything that comes with the tag of being serious, as if serious means that it cannot give pleasure, it cannot provoke, it cannot do all of those things that any good art is supposed to do, whether it's popular or literary, or low or high. So I think the distinction actually muddies and sort of hinders more than it helps. Um, and partly through my work in Caravan, where I handle the books pages, I'm trying to do a little bit to create this kind of discussion on what is literature. And partly the only way to do it is to read our contemporaries and to read modern Indian writers who are now, some of them, you know, getting very old. And I think there's a whole generation of mid to late 20th century Indian writers who are passing away, who are very very old. So to me, to ask what is literary in an Indian question, in an Indian context, would be to go back to Krishna Sopti or Mahashweta Devi or U R Anantamurthy or Bashir, or the who are considered in a sort of a celebratory way the giants, but who we don't necessarily engage with as younger writers always. So for me, that is the literary. And I think we need to. I think we need to be stop being afraid of the literary. Stop being afraid that it will bore us or that it's not
Diksha, just
related
put the
to
chat
our
quickly.
lives as we live them today.
You know, you mentioned about your work at Caravan. Now,
Yeah.
there's so much happening in Indian literature, and what you mentioned in your own way, you're trying to sort of bring about small changes by writing about contemporaries and looking at what's been happening from a overall
Yeah.
sort of Indian literary scene. Um, where do you see this entire bit going towards? Do you think there is going to be a coming of age of Indian literary in terms of the number of authors we are seeing, number of writers that are emerging? Where do you see this all
Yeah.
going?
I think the language that we use to talk about literature tends to come from publishing, or tends to come from a market context. So we say it's a great time because there's so many publishers, there's an explosion of authors, age when we each a much more personal relationship to it, and don't lean so heavily on marketing jargon or publishing jargon to describe what we consider of literary value. And in that sense, to me, it's irrelevant whether what we like and what we feel is significant is popular or not popular, is literary or not literary, as long as we can argue for its significance. So to me, that is very important. Can we develop a language of personal meaning in relation to literature, whatever that is, from whichever genre?
Right. No, very interesting there, Anjum. I was seeing some comments on the chat window. Unfortunately, it
Oh,
just zoomed out of view. So there is a question from. I'm just reading it out. There's a question from Kushi, and she says, "Anjum, please share with us your experience of writing so many different novels across the last few years."
sorry, can you repeat that, Kumar? Your voice was a little distorted.
Okay.
Your experience of writing? Sorry?
Yeah, her question was, tell us about your experience of writing so many different novels over the last few years.
Okay, sure. Well, I've actually written in different genres, to the extent that I've also written short stories. I started out actually as a poet. And for the longest time, I was convinced that that's all I could do and all I wanted to do. So my first book was a book of poems, and then I went into novels, and then in 2012 I published a book of short stories, and then the latest one again was a novel. So yeah, I think the experience most I think most prominently has been about trying to see my writing as not something I'm doing in isolation, but as a larger wave or a larger sort of an effusion that seems to be happening, taking place around me. So the excitement has been, yes, discovering my own voice, finding the themes I want to write about, trying to establish this sense of connection with I'm part of something larger, and what is my connection to it. So that for me has been critical to the experience. And I grew up reading a lot of Western writers, like a lot of us Indians do. But about the time when I was considering writing my own work was also the time when a lot of Indian writers suddenly were discovering their voices. Arundhati Roy, Pankaj Mishra, Rohinton Mistry, Amit Chaudhary. So I kind of feel like I owe something to that wave, because I came sort of published my work in the aftermath of that. So for me, the experience has been very much that trying to find my own feet, but also trying to establish this sense of connection with what people are writing around me.
Wow. Well, that brings us to the end of the session, Anjum. But
Okay.
thank you so much. It was a very candid and fun conversation with you. And I'm sure
Thanks, Kumar. Thanks.
our viewers had a good time as well. So thanks so much for joining us.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. See you again.